He was a failed doctor turned wannabe flashy Hollywood producer who really only started to see success when he began exploiting young TikTok hopefuls with dreams of their own. Who is this man, you ask? Today we are talking about Robert Shin, the owner and creator of 7M Films and preacher at the Los Angeles Shekinah Church. Both organizations were recently featured in the Netflix docuseries Dancing for the Devil, where families of cult members spoke out about the difficult experiences they've been having trying to connect and stay connected with their children. So, what is this so-called cult? And how is this all connected? Today, we try to answer those questions. So, sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and really just human behavior in general. So, if you like that sort of thing, I would absolutely love to have you here. So, please consider subscribing. I also just created a Patreon, so if you want to check that out, I will leave a link in the description below. And I am sponsoring teachers this summer. So if you're a teacher and you need a little help funding your classroom supplies, go ahead and create an Amazon wish list and email it to me with a little bit about yourself. My email is letfresherin@gmail.com, and I'll feature your Amazon wish list and your story in one of my videos this summer. Quick audio disclaimer for those listening to the podcast version. This episode is for entertainment purposes only. It is not meant to malign anyone from any person, organization, or entity. Many of the claims I am making are alleged or speculated, and please consider everything I say in this to be my opinion. Always do your own unbiased research. So, with that, let's jump right in. Ever since the Netflix show was released about 7M and the dancers involved, the internet has run rampant with speculations, accusations, and judgments. People are confused, baffled, and overall seem to have no understanding about what undue influence is at all. So, today I hope to add some clarity to this situation, and I'm not claiming to be an expert. I am just fascinated by cults, people in cults, how they get in and out, and what the public reaction typically is when it comes to people speaking out about a cult experience or being involved in one. And I want to say right here at the top that this church and this entertainment group are very tight lipped. Even their websites are basically just skeletal, there's just nothing really there. Honestly, if I came upon these websites without an understanding of what these organizations are, I'd assume that they just no longer existed. That's how abysmal these websites are. There are little to no details. It is a stark contrast to other legitimate talent agencies and management companies where they share who all their clients are, what their skill sets are, and they talk about the ad campaigns those people have done or the projects those actors have worked on. It seems like 7M wants to be a popular media company, but at the same time doesn't want anyone to have any information about their media company. Doesn't really compute to me. However, they have made statements recently to address the allegations that are being made. 7M took to Instagram and made the following statement. The Netflix docuseries is a slanderous work of fiction born from a failed extortion attempt and invented for the sole purpose of gaining fame and fortune. 2 years ago, Melanie Lee Goldman, Priscilla Lee, aka Alicia Priscilla Lee, and their co conspirators launched a concerted smear campaign to defame Robert Shin, his family, and his business associates after Mr. Shin did not capitulate to Miss Lee's extortion demands. Despite sworn statements from co-conspirators that confirmed the scheme by Miss Goldman and Miss Lee to disseminate widespread lies, Netflix recklessly provided a global platform to peddle a false narrative that is at the center of ongoing litigation. We will continue to pursue all legal remedies available to stop the spread of salacious lies and expect to be fully vindicated in court. We've seen this so many times when a group or a person is exposed on a large scale platform like Netflix. We just saw it recently with Baby Reindeer and Fiona Harvey, who basically outed herself in an attempt to clear her name and then threatened to sue Netflix for exposing her and making all these lies about her. But it's like, babe, if you just had never responded and said it was about you, we would not have known it was about you. You know what I mean? Also, Netflix is a massive, massive company. They are going to do their due diligence to make sure that what they're sharing is vetted. They're going to make sure that the stories are true. They're going to make sure that they are sharing a perspective, and they're going to act like journalists and ask for 7M's and Robert Shin's response. And as far as I know, they didn't receive one to rebuttal any of the information. Honestly, it would have been fascinating to see a sit down interview with Robert Shin and see how he tried to talk his way out of all the things he's done. Furthermore, the docuseries showed receipts. There were several recorded audios of the things he was directing his congregation to do. So, as much as we don't officially know what the truth is, I am always inclined to believe the victims or survivors of a group like this because I have such an understanding of what these cult dynamics look like. And we're going to explore those here in today's video. Because, like a lot of cults and cult like groups, the inner workings of 7M and the Shekinah Church are a mystery to everyone except those involved. And it's my belief that that action is very intentional. So, who is Robert Shin? What are these organizations, and why is this church alleged to be connected to 7M? Well, Robert Shin is alleged to have been born in Canada and had actually become a doctor in Toronto until suddenly one day he decided it was his God given mission to move to California and start a church. So in 1994, he would do just that, and the Shekinah Church would be created. So, what is the Shekinah Church, and what does Robert and his followers believe? The word Shekinah means the manifestation of the presence of God, and it has many varying meanings depending on the religion. In the Bible, it is depicted as, and I quote, "When Solomon had finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and sacrifices, and the Shekinah, glory and brilliance of the Lord, filled the house. The priests could not enter the house of the Lord because the glory and brilliance of the Lord had filled the Lord's house," unquote. So it seems in this case to be a little bit of a metaphor or a feeling, but in some religions and perhaps even in cultures, it's actually a dwelling place or a place of worship. Robert's Shekinah Church seems to be kind of a combination of all of these ideas, as well as a new one. It is a dwelling place since the followers are required to live there or with other members of the church in an isolated area. It is invite only, so only people who are the most devoted to God are allowed to stay. And all of this creates a feeling of godly presence. But I believe there's an additional meaning to this version of the Shekinah Church, since there are several other Shekinah churches throughout America that are not connected to Robert. So I believe that Robert believes himself to be Shekinah, the manifestation of God. And he preaches God's word as perceived through his own perspective. But he shares his own personal beliefs and this personal perspective as if it's God's own word being channeled through him. He also calls himself man of God, and thus his wife is the woman of God. Not just a man of God or a woman of God, the man and the woman of God. Real culty behavior, if you ask me. Now, I've seen a lot of speculations of belief systems, and honestly, it's been difficult to pinpoint exactly what this group believes. But they are a Christian based group, and it seems that the followers do believe that Robert is all powerful and is speaking for God. One group I've seen either connected to or operating similarly to the Shekinah Church is the Soldiers of God denomination of Christianity, which some of you may remember my video from last year about the body that was left at Jeju Spa. The video is here if you're interested in checking it out. But the victim is said to have not survived the initiation practices of this group, the Soldiers of God cult. Their idea is exactly what it sounds like, that followers are soldiers of God, and they treat their mission of serving God as if they are in the military, leading one to believe that they're anticipating attacks on others. They are also expected to endure violent acts and even starvation and dehydration as a part of their initiation into the group. It's like hazing or almost a test of strength. It's just so dangerous, and it's really sad. They look at people who oppose them as an actual enemy that might need to be attacked. And Shekinah allegedly has ties to that group, especially since Shekinah tried and arguably succeeded at enmeshing itself within the Korean community in LA. Some have even speculated that Robert preyed upon vulnerable immigrants who may have had less resources. He was able to create a plan of worship and control to those who became devotees. Many people who have come forward from that time claim that he did use coercive and brainwashing tactics to manipulate people into believing that they had to stay in the church or face eternal damnation. They may have been told they were allowed to leave, but there was always this threat of poverty and pain if you were to turn your back on Shekinah and, by association, Robert. That is not free will. That is literally the definition of coercive control. And if we do consider the theory that he was targeting Korean immigrants who maybe didn't have as much resources, didn't have a network of people within the area they were living in, or maybe didn't have a strong sense of community or belonging, or in some people's case, were coming from neglectful or maybe even abusive homes, and they find someone like Robert who offers them housing, support, some kind of job, and spiritual connection, then they're bound to feel like not only do they have to stay, but they might want to stay because they might not even know what the alternative looks like. Other sources have said that allegedly, Shekinah's goal is to save 1 billion souls by implementing something called the 7 Mountains of Influence, which it's speculated is the reason why this entertainment company is called 7M, as in 7 mountains. The idea is that Christians need to be the leaders of the 7 mountains of what they consider influences society. So Christians basically need to be the ruler of each of these 7 mountains. These 7 mountains are family, religion, education, government, business, media, and of course, arts and entertainment. Some evangelical practitioners and pastors have even asked their congregations to go undercover, to not tell their bosses that they are Christian until they rise to the rankings and are in control of the business or that government entity. And then all of a sudden they're like, surprise, I'm Christian. This is how I want to run things. And all of you need to be Christian too. It's it's really scary if you think about it. And it's concerning that perhaps in America, anyways, we have seen that happen, especially in government, but that's a conversation for a totally different day. If people are pretending they want to serve the public or make an organization better, and then come to find out they have this secret religious agenda, it's just really concerning. Like, can you imagine the public outrage if it wasn't a Christian who was doing this? Oh my gosh, I feel like a civil war would ensue. Well, in America, anyways. And if I may speculate wildly for a moment,
Speculate wildly.
I have a sneaking suspicion that bringing his church to Los Angeles, California, the city of dreams, was not him listening to God's word, especially considering that he not only targets social media influencers who already have a following, he also has a history of dabbling in film production and even real estate. Yeah, he actually produced a few short films and even a movie that, get this, Meghan Markle was in. Yeah, when I found this out, my mind was absolutely blown. His first production company was called Imaginating Images, and Meghan Markle was in the movie Random Encounters, which was originally released in 2013 when she was conveniently rising to Suits fame, and then it was re released once she became a princess in 2018. So, yeah, it seems like Robert really has this MO of like sitting, lurking in the background, and then using someone else's fame and fortune to get income. And this entertainment entrepreneurial spirit runs in the family, as Robert's son Isaiah started his own production company, High Freak Films, in 2018. And his son worked with a lot of dancers and dance companies in the Los Angeles area. Robert has also had a number of other businesses, including a flower shop, a cafe, and more, several of which are currently involved in a civil lawsuit. Some of the companies involved in that lawsuit are Alpha Realty, Studio on the Mount Inc., and RCP Financial Incorporated. Former members and dancers are involved in this lawsuit, and they claim that Robert manipulated them into giving these businesses money or underpaying them as staff members. Among the people who have spoken out is Lydia Chung, who claims she was forced to work 6 days a week for barely any pay. Priscilla Lee, one of the ex-followers in the docuseries, corroborates this, claiming that she worked full-time and only got $80 every 2 weeks. That's $40 a week to live on in Los Angeles. The average someone in the group had in their possession at one time was $100. And not only that, Robert promoted an ideology that seemed very similar to the prosperity gospel. The idea that the more you give to the church, the more God will reward you in return. And if you leave the church, you might go broke. So when Robert expected tithings and huge sums of money, his followers didn't even bat an eye. And what's even worse, he demanded their passwords to their bank accounts, and he demanded to hold their checks so he could make checks out to himself and the church. And they agreed to it because if they said no, then they weren't just disappointing Robert, they were turning their back on God himself. The alternative was essentially a huge sin in the eyes of God. Plus, in the 2000s, followers were used to turning over their passwords for things like email and social media. In fact, Robert and the church monitored, and I'm sure still do monitor, all social media and computer activity of their members. They literally spy on their followers, exerting complete control over their communication however they show up online. So when you see Miranda Derrick posting online that she's not in a cult and that she does see her family and no one's controlling her, she has total freedom, it is safe to assume that it either isn't her or she is being literally directed on what to say and how to say it. It's all controlled, it's all scripted. So, with this level of control already being exerted and being normal within the cult, it would have been a terrible idea for someone like Lydia to reject Robert and tell him no when he demanded her passwords. He had already set the precedent within the group. So tragically, Lydia Chung ended up handing over nearly $4 million in money and assets before she woke up and escaped the cult. And unfortunately, she lost her 2009 lawsuit against Robert and the church. Not only did she lose all that, she lost her husband, who Robert convinced her was being controlled by a demon. And that's why he wouldn't join Robert's church. It couldn't possibly be because her husband saw that this cult was controlling his wife's time, her finances, forcing her to change her behavior, and he was likely bringing up valid concerns because he loved her. But no, according to Robert, he's just evil and wants her to experience total damnation. But again, this is a classic cult tactic. It's what every cult leader does. It fits the requirements of a cult leader to a T. And I'm seeing online that the general public simply does not understand that. They don't understand that there's a difference between total free will and coercive control. It is indoctrination. It is brainwashing. They rip you away from the people who care most about you and always make those people the enemy. And that's exactly what he continues to do with his current followers. In 2011, another ex-member, Jung Hee Lee, sued Robert because he forced them to work full-time for years for a $30 stipend per week, again, in California, one of the most expensive places to live in the USA. But I'd guess she was probably also living with or near Robert at the time, since allegedly all members ended up being forced to live in a house together. Not only that, but they had a very strict schedule. They went to bed at 10 p.m., only to wake up at 5, and then it was required for them to pray at 6. Then they worked full time. Other ex members alleged that even their food was controlled and perhaps even monitored because Robert wanted everyone to look a certain way. Sound familiar? Oh, right. It's only like every other cult leader we have ever talked about on this channel. There's even been speculation that Miranda has been forced to lose weight since her time there, with some Instagram accounts whose goal it is to expose Robert sharing comparisons and valid concerns. One of them is at Exposing 7M, and I highly recommend you go check them out if you haven't yet. They've literally been trying to expose this group for years, and they update daily, and it's been a great resource. So, not only is their sleep controlled, their day to day is controlled, their food is controlled, they had to ask permission to do anything at all. They literally could not leave the house without permission. What's also scary is it seemed or seems to be like this pyramid like structure within the recruitment process and mentorship in the group. It reminds me a lot of Nexium's DOS. DOS was the branch of Nexium where the women ended up getting branded. Once you got into DOS, you had a master, and so you were their slave. And then you built your own little group of slaves who called you master. It's also very MLM like in its structure and practice, where whoever recruits you into the group becomes your mentor or your upline, and then your mentor or upline has an upline who they answer to, and it just goes on and on and on. And all the information flows from the bottom of the pyramid all the way to the top, to the leader, who in this case would be Robert. So, like most cults, this mentor dynamic also created this really toxic environment of spying and additional control. If your mentor saw something that you did and didn't like it or was against the rules, or you brought up a valid concern or question or challenged Robert in any way, they would report you to him. You're always being watched. And if you even began mentoring someone, well, now you have to spy on them too. It's a requirement. Because if you don't report this sinful act, then you might also get punished. It creates this really cyclical environment of fear and internal isolation. So you don't feel safe talking with other followers, because what if they report you to Robert if you have a question or concern? So you are never able to talk things out with your fellow followers. You're never able to point out red flags or quote unquote gossip with other members. Even within the group, you are emotionally and mentally isolated and alone. So you just can't leave. And even if you wanted to or you did, you wouldn't have money. You can't vent to a friend because you might get in trouble. You're not sleeping enough. You might not be eating enough. And you may have been overworking. You're just exhausted. Oh, and you're not allowed to have any contact with any support outside of the group. The only reason Miranda is allowed to visit her family is because they spoke out publicly to millions of people, and that made Robert need to control the narrative. So, Miranda is allowed to see her family, but on Robert's terms. They can't bring Robert up or the cult. And I'd venture to guess that not much has changed, considering one of the survivors of Shekinah that was in the docuseries was literally escaping the cult During pre-production of the docu-series, they were literally following her experience of leaving the cult and interviewed her immediately after she escaped. So I can't even try to think about what it would be like to unpack 23 years of trauma in front of a camera. And I can only hope that it was cathartic and healing for her. I'm talking here about Priscilla Lee. She had a sister named Melanie. These were the other two sisters who were featured in Dancing for the Devil, and they shared their heartbreaking story of getting in and then out of the cult. They were two Korean little girls who didn't have a safe home life and they needed community and care, and that's how they got involved in the group. But Melanie was able to escape before Priscilla. Melanie woke up after several young women interrupted a sermon and claimed that Robert had SA'd them. He then asked his followers for forgiveness because almost half the congregation left the church after that, thank goodness. And honestly, if you've been following the Micah Miller case, this reminds me a lot of that case. I made a video about it. You can find it here. But her husband, JP Miller, who was a pastor at a church, a massive church, he had a pattern of grooming teenagers. And it's a very similar situation where before he was married to Micah, he had to admit that he had been communicating sexually with a young girl, and a lot of the church left, but not everyone. It's a very similar situation. I highly recommend looking into it. But back to this situation, those allegations weren't quite enough for Melanie. I mean, she'd been in the church since she was a child. She was financially, emotionally, and spiritually tied to it. So, what was she supposed to do if she left? Where was she supposed to go? But like Sarah Edmondson says in A Little Bit Culty, a really great podcast you should listen to, sometimes you just have to keep putting things on a metaphorical shelf in your brain until that shelf eventually just falls crashing to the ground and you realize that everything has been false. It's like all of a sudden, all those things that you had kind of tucked away come crashing to the ground. And you have to look at them and pick them up and really examine them and decide to not put them back on the shelf. So after Robert made many sexual advances on Melanie because according to him she had to pay her price, she was finally empowered enough to escape. This wasn't the kind fatherly figure who had saved her from a broken and abandoned home. This was a monster. And she tried to save Priscilla too, but sadly, Priscilla was still so indoctrinated and just refused to leave because she really feared she would end up going to hell if she tried. And look, I get that it's really easy to judge this from the outside. I've seen so much judgment of these survivors and even those still in the group online. And I just want to challenge you to put yourself in their situation for a second. And you might think, well, I'd never be in that situation. Well, if you think like that and you don't understand how to recognize the red flags, you're a prime target for a cult, to be honest. But I just want you to consider this. We'll play a little game. I just want you to stop and think of one way that you identify. Maybe you call yourself an athlete, or you're an actor like me, or maybe one day you find out that you were actually adopted and the parents you thought were your parents for your entire life are completely different people. Whatever it might be, we cling to those identities. Our identities tie us to who we are as people. Our belief systems and our upbringings help to create these identities and they help us understand ourselves better. So I want you to think about however you identify yourself. And then think of that changing, disappearing, being false. You can't play sports at all anymore. If I couldn't act anymore, I would have no clue what I was doing. It would be a full on crisis. Remember the beginning of the pandemic when all of a sudden your life had to change and you didn't know what the future looked like and you had to just kind of sit and wonder and you're in a total existential crisis. I mean, I was at the beginning. So just think about how difficult it would be to reconcile all of that and your identity and how it has to change and your life is never going to look like what it looked like. Think about that before you pass judgment on these survivors and victims, because I can almost guarantee that it would be life changing for you. You would have to completely relearn who you are. So, of course, with Melanie gone, Priscilla felt more lost. But Robert had to keep her in. He made Melanie sound like a demon, evil, and Priscilla had nothing to prove the contrary. Robert had complete power over her, and he would yield that power into SAing her regularly. So much that she felt like it was a penance that she had to pay. She hated it so much that her body had a visceral reaction to it, and she would end up getting really sick after each encounter. But her shelf she had built in the back of her mind finally crashed to the floor when Robert's wife burst into her room and started beating her. And when Robert found out about this incident, he excused it. Priscilla obviously felt betrayed, unsafe, but it was finally what she needed in order to break free of his control. And thankfully, she did, and she was able to reunite with her sister Melanie. So let's just hope that the same thing can happen and will happen with the Wilking sisters and their family one day. Robert, in my opinion, is very money motivated. He hasn't really seen any level of real financial success at his own hands, at least not one that he's been satisfied with. The only financial successes he's actually ever had has been connected to exploiting the labor and trust of his followers, or manipulating them into giving him their bank information and demanding tithings for church because, while it was for their own prosperity anyways, it was for their own good. But honestly, it's like he set out to create a Christian Scientology and he just kind of failed miserably. I mean, he's a failed doctor, failed producer, failed real estate agent who found a honeypot with local popular naive TikTok stars and discovered it'd be easy to exploit them. But if they caught wind or any idea that what Robert was doing was wrong, they would be encouraged to not work with him. So instead, he had to isolate them all. He targeted young, Christian, talented people who hadn't been in LA long. This has been his MO. He's literally been at this for years, for decades. He sits back in the background and he just lets his followers bring in the money and the attention. Robert has been able to stay dangerously under the radar for decades at this point. He doesn't necessarily want fame, he just wants the fortune that comes with it. He may not be a good film producer, but he is good at preying on vulnerability and weaknesses. He is good at making you feel special. Everyone loves the idea of being a part of something exclusive. It gives you this feeling that you're special, important, and valued. When you hear the phrase invite only, it doesn't really matter what it is, you just want to be invited to it. So when dancers found out there was a place that was invite only, that was connecting dancers with other dancers, and those collaborations were leading to viral videos, I can only imagine that they became hungry for the invite. And how convenient that there was this veil of godliness to cover the insidiousness underneath. It all sounds so great on the outside. Just a group of Christians talking about God over dinner. Oh, and we all happen to be dancers who want to collaborate creatively and build something together. You have to have a certain skill level and following to be invited. But if you join, you'll go viral. It all sounds great, you know? It almost sounds too good to be true. So, if you're a young and impressionable person looking for a community of like minded people who love to do the things you do, well, then you just might be hook, lined, and sinker. The ex members who are dancers all said that they just happened to think it was a good idea to get Robert's help. I mean, here we are, all these dancers wanting to be creative together, venting about the challenges of creating content online, and we all met because we all go to the same church, and Robert's great and supportive of our dance endeavors, and he's our pastor, and we trust him. Oh, and he just happens to offer all of his business expertise. But I don't think that's what happened. As I mentioned briefly before, his son was already involved in shooting dancers. He had the experience. The pandemic was dying down, but was still making TikTok dance videos go absolutely viral on a day to day basis. It was normal in that community to get together in small groups to make content all day long. So it's my belief that Robert saw an opportunity and he jumped on it. He knew that if he targeted young, vulnerable, trusting people with big dreams and big drive who all had the same pain point, producing is hard, I just want to create, then he would be able to make a lot of money. And he would make a lot of money. In my last video on this topic, I talked a little bit about how agencies worked and how it's not the way Robert runs his agency. Yes, it's normal for an agency or manager to be exclusive and invite only. Yes, it's normal for them to get jobs. And yes, it's normal for an agent or manager to get a percentage of the job that they acquired for you. What's not normal is taking a fee from the creator or dancer in order to create the content that is making that money. He would charge the dancers not just an agency fee. No. He charged them photography fees and multiple tithings to the church. So tell me again how Shekinah has no link or connection to 7M. Tell me again how they're two completely different entities. If you're demanding that your dancers give 30% of their income to the church. They gave so much money to either 7M or Shekinah that they would end up getting about 10% of the total earnings of that job after taxes. And hopefully they knew they had to pay taxes, because I'll tell you right now, a lot of creators who start making a ton of money don't realize that they have to set a portion, a third of that money aside to pay taxes, and then tax time rolls around and they are totally effed. I have seen it happen to people I know. So if you are a creator or you're doing anything that is not W-2 work, just track your money. I've talked a lot about how I'm an actor. I have an agent. My agent gets me acting work. If I book an acting job, my agent gets 20% of whatever that pays because they did the legwork to get me that opportunity. I would not have gotten that opportunity without them. I do not pay them anything if I don't book a job. They get 20%, no more. It's been agreed upon ahead of time. But these dancers are being horribly exploited, and their money is being controlled. And they're not allowed to talk about it because they've all signed NDAs. So tell me, what church requires you to sign an NDA if something insidious and maybe even illegal or dangerous isn't going on? I've never signed an NDA with my agency either. I've signed NDAs for certain projects. I've auditioned for really popular TV shows, and I've had to sign an NDA before I can even receive the script. That's normal. But it's not normal to sign an NDA with my agent. They have never asked me to do that. So why is all of this happening? Is it just greed? Well, I would say yes, it's that, and control. Because if these dancers have nowhere to live or escape to, they've estranged themselves from their families and their other friends. They have no money because Robert's taken it all, so they can't even afford to buy an Uber to get away from the house, or let alone pay rent on a new place or a hotel room. What are they supposed to do? Also, this might be their first experience with an agent or manager. They might think, oh, this is how it's supposed to work. And when they see it working and they start going viral, they start making more money, they start getting brand deals, they start getting sponsorships and roles in commercials, they think, oh, Robert must know what he's doing. But then when Robert's going through negotiations, sources have said that he doesn't even know what the basic SAG union rates are for projects, which if you are an agent or a manager, especially in LA, you should be able to rattle that off right off the top of your head. So no, it is not as easy as just leaving. It is way more complicated and emotionally draining and confusing than just up and deciding to leave. Especially when you have a wealthy leader constantly making threats and instilling fear into you. So now that the group has been exposed, of course, it's the internet. So we see people victim shaming and blaming, and people blaming the parents. And it's just a sheer misunderstanding of coercive control in general. And to me, that's just heartbreaking. But what might be the most heartbreaking is people literally screaming at Miranda Derrick that she's in a cult. Guys, we have to consider all the information that we've learned, not just what's sensationalized. Her husband was one of the first members of 7M, and he was in a dance cult previously. He is used to this dynamic. And if he is one of Robert's first dance followers, you have to understand that he might be the most staunchly supporting of him. Also, Miranda's income is controlled by Robert. Miranda has no one to vent to or talk to or ask questions to besides her husband, who, once again, is probably one of Robert's most staunch supporters. Robert is constantly telling her how terrible her family is and constantly telling his entire congregation, all of us out here, we're evil and we're against her. So when we scream on Instagram at her that she's in a cult, she's only going to believe Robert more. She's only going to be like, well, Robert said all these people are mean and crazy and they're all attacking me, so I guess he's right. I'm going to keep trusting this guy. So rushing to anyone and telling them they're in a cult, it's only going to push them further and further into the cult. No one, and I mean no one who is in a cult, has ever left that cult because someone said, hey, FYI, you're in a cult. That's just not how deconstruction works. So attacking Miranda on social media and making fun of her for being in the cult, it's literally only going to drive her closer to the people who are exploiting and abusing her. Her parents, her family, they're in a very difficult situation. But I have to be honest, I don't know if they've been going about this in the best way. Publicly calling the group a cult to millions of followers only further isolated them from their daughter. It gave Robert an opportunity to strategize and change up the narrative. And it's clear that this docuseries, even though it was so well done and so well intentioned and really just so beautiful, unfortunately, it might have made the Wilking family more of an enemy, and it might take longer for Miranda to break free of Robert's control. In fact, she recently took to Instagram to share a statement because a post of her at her sister's wedding was garnishing a lot of attention and discourse in the comments. Her statement reads, hey everyone, just wanted to hop on here and say that I have seen the documentary. I want to start by saying that I appreciate the concern that's been expressed for my well being. Due to pending litigation in which I am a plaintiff in a defamation lawsuit, it's not appropriate for me to comment on specific allegations, though I will state that I do not condone this in any way. I love my mom, dad, and Melanie, and they will forever be a part of my life. The truth is, we just don't see eye to eye at this time. I believe this documentary is a one-sided story. I gave my life to Jesus Christ in 2020 and asked my family for some space in the very beginning to collect my thoughts and process my new walk I wanted to take with God. I also told my sister that I wanted to continue our Wilking Sisters social media page. She logged me out of our account, and when I asked for access back, she denied my request. So I had no other choice but to start my own account and pursue my own career. I still have yet to receive access into our account. That could be because it's very clear that Robert's controlling your social media accounts. My family didn't honor the space I asked for, and I saw a different side of them I've never seen before. Honestly, it made me mad, frustrated, and annoyed that they were being so overbearing and chaotic. In 2020, I went to Michigan to visit my family for Christmas. My papa was taken to the hospital due to medical issues. We got a phone call saying that he had a short time before he would pass. Melanie and I drove to the hospital to say our last goodbyes. Before we went to the hospital to do so, I started to pray for our papa in the car, and Melanie got offended, angry with me, and told me to stop and to never pray around her. Our papa passed away that day. Fast forward about a month and a half. Melanie and I are in LA, and we're about to head back to Michigan for our papa's funeral. I was at a place with my family where I felt like I was being harassed. My parents and sister are not religious. They immediately called me going to church twice a week a cult. I felt that if I went back to the funeral, they would try to keep me there and not let me come back to LA. So I told my family that I would not be going to Michigan and that I wanted to move in and begin my life with James. To keep it simple, I did not want to be around them at that time because I felt threatened by them. I've been getting together with them over the past couple years to make amends, move on, and work things out as a family. This documentary has created a further challenge between us as I work to overcome this public attack. No one likes to be portrayed as their brainwashed, not in control of their own life, shell of herself, human perfect daughter, sister, when that just isn't the truth. I will add that I would have preferred that my family's circumstances remain private. I'm forced and feel like I have no other choice but to defend myself because of all this. I can't convince anyone of anything. I am just a woman trying to live my life. I'm not a victim. I am not in any harm. I am not being. I've never asked my family or anyone else to help me in any way. Respectfully, what I choose to do with my life is up to me. As I take time to process and reflect on this situation, I would appreciate your continued support. Thank you, Amanda Derrick. Now, a lot of the discourse in the comments on the Exposing 7M post that shared that statement, people don't believe that it was written by her. They believe it was written by Robert. They believe that a lot of the claims are false, especially considering her sister had gone to the church with her at one point. So it doesn't really make any sense that she would not want her to pray. I think that her parents publicly speaking out was a good decision. They were desperate. However, I think that calling the group a cult so early on in their initial statement that they made on a live from years ago, it immediately is going to create a defensiveness for Robert and the group and even Miranda herself. I'm not saying that it's not a cult. I believe it is. And I just really feel for the Wilking family because it's a really sad situation that's only being exacerbated by the cruelness of social media. People are torn. You're seeing arguments of all sides of the spectrum here. My heart really goes out to Miranda, her family, and everyone's still stuck in that cult. So, after hearing all that, you may be like, okay, Erin, well, how do we get someone out of a cult? And look, I'm not an expert and I'm certainly not a professional at this, but from what I've learned, we need to consider the fact that the cult leader has already probably joked to their followers about being called a cult. So they're probably a little bit desensitized to it. And they probably all believe that, oh, Jesus was persecuted too, and people could have called him a cult because he was so radical for the time. They've just been completely desensitized to it. So, the best way to help someone get out of a cult is to try to trigger their critical thinking because their critical thinking and their instincts have been utterly shut off. So, it's a great idea if you have a loved one in a cult to ask them leading questions that will force them to think about the cult or their belief system in a different way. It's also a good idea to help connect them with their identities pre cults. Maybe you choreograph a dance together. Maybe you go putt putting together or do something that you both enjoyed before they were involved in the cult. Also, you can find examples of other cult leaders who are similar to their cult leader with similar qualities or beliefs. But you never want to tell someone how they should feel about something that they're a part of or say it's a cult. You have to always come with a desire to understand. Why do you like this group? What's resonating with you? Why are you so passionate about your new belief system? It's all about connecting with them and triggering that critical thinking response, or maybe even inspire doubt in their minds. If you're able to accomplish this, then you're off to a really good start. Stephen Hassan actually has a great article about this that goes into a lot more detail, so I'll go ahead and pin it down below for you. Now, in extreme cases, you may need a deconstruction therapist or specialist who specializes in cults and cult dynamics and getting people out of cults who can come and have almost like an intervention with them. And honestly, you just have to be patient. It's going to take time. And you also have to understand that they might never be the same person they were before the cult. The cult literally changed them at their core. So you both have to be open to rediscovering who you both are and what this new dynamic is going to look like. Sarah Edmondson has talked a lot about activism post cult and how sometimes she wished she had spent more time healing before becoming so outspoken. But she also understood how important it was to do what she did to expose Keith Raniere. When I saw Priscilla's story, and I later learned after listening to an interview with one of the producers of the docuseries that she was actually going on that journey in real time, it really broke my heart. The woman gave 23 years of her life to that cult and is publicly deconstructing everything while simultaneously being an activist to warn others. It has to be so challenging and exhausting and confusing, and I really hope it served her to do the docuseries during that process, because I don't think it's something we've seen in another cult documentary, like actually watching someone's process of escaping a cult. I think it really was incredibly valuable to see, but I really just hope she's taking care of herself, and I hope everyone involved in the docuseries is taking care of themselves and knows and embraces and feels empowered by how brave they've been. And with that, I'd like to thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and please just be kind. Every single person on this earth is fighting a demon that we don't know anything about. So please be patient and kind. Stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. Until next time, bye.